It's time. Let's check out the P model of the legendary Mi-24 gunship in War Thunder. NATO calls it the Hind. The Soviets called it the Crocodile and the Flying Tank. The Mujahideen called it Satan's Chariot. Whatever your preferred nickname, the Mi-24 is one of the most famous, most deadly, and most widely used military helicopters of the 20th century. The Mi-24 was born of an independent project proposed by Mikhail Mil directly to the Soviet leadership. This was a reversal of the usual process, where the military hierarchy would be telling industry what they needed. Instead, Mil went to the generals and tried to convince them of the utility and the strategic viability of a flying helicopter version of the familiar infantry fighting vehicle concept. Eventually, he won them over, and after a few proposed designs were weeded out, work on the Mi-24 began in earnest in 1968. The helicopter had, and really still has, no direct Western counterpart. It was designed to combine the best features of an infantry transport and a scout helicopter, what we in the West would call the air cavalry concept, and also still be a gunship capable of providing close air support after disembarking the troops. The Mi-24 entered service in 1972 and could transport between 6 to 10 combat troops and still carry a useful weapons load. Its first combat service was during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, where its effectiveness shocked Western military analysts and caused major shifts in NATO battlefield tactics. The Mi-24 eventually went on to be produced in so many versions that the Roman alphabet almost ran out of numbers for NATO to, designate them all with their code name. The helicopter has gone on to be used by dozens of countries and has seen combat service on every continent except Antarctica. What we're looking at here is the Mi-24P, NATO codename Hind F, which has some significant differences from earlier models. This version replaces the traditional chin-mounted gun turret for a fixed cannon installation and features enhanced defensive equipment. This version is still in service all over the world. What we have in War Thunder are three versions of the Mi-24P, a Soviet tech tree version, a German tech tree version, and a German premium version. All three are at battle rating 9.7. The only real difference between them are some minor alterations in the loadouts. Now, in terms of the weapon system, the Mi-24P gets a ballistics computer for its cannons and rockets, but not for the unguided bombs. It gets a 15x optical zoom, sensor point of interest, a radar warning receiver, and night vision, but no thermals. Now, the loadouts are all broadly comparable, with a healthy variety of rockets, bombs, gun pods, air-to-ground missiles, and air-to-air missiles. Now, some of the loadouts arrange the weapons differently on different pylons between the versions, so if you switch back and forth, make sure that you double-check what you have selected. I don't normally talk about unguided rockets too much, but the S8KO rockets need to be singled out for a mention, as these are very effective weapons when you can actually hit with them. And if you can place a salvo of them from a good top-down angle into a ground target, it's almost certainly going to pop. The primary difference really is with the air-to-air missiles. The Soviet version gets the R-60M as the top-end option, and the German versions get the R-60MK. All versions of the R-60 are high-performance weapons with 30G maneuvering, and the upgraded versions get all-aspect sensing capability. The only air-to-ground missile that the Mi-24P gets are the 9M114 Sturm missiles. These are semi-auto command line of sight weapons that you steer into the target manually with your gunner's zoom reticle. With a direct hit, these can be effective, but a hit from a bad angle or a near miss might not do a lot of damage. Notably, this weapon does have pretty good range. You can score hits with it out beyond 4 kilometers. The flight performance of the Mi-24P, and Mi-24s in general, is unique. This is a heavy helicopter, and it carries a lot of inertia with it when it's flying. What that means is that it can be kind of awkward to make sharp directional changes sometimes, and it can feel unresponsive to control inputs at higher speeds. The trick seems to be using the cyclic input combined with the tail rotor input at the same time, instead of just trying to use one or the other. The Mi-24P is also pretty fast, which ironically can make its handling a bit more difficult, since it's going to take a lot more force to change direction while traveling at high speeds. Doubly so for a big heavy monster like this. Flying the Mi-24P into missions provides the full gambit of options for helicopter gameplay. It can be used for regular on-meta standoff missile attacks with the 9M114 Sturms. It can be used for high-speed rocket passes. It can be used for gun scouting. And it can be used to hunt other helicopters or even engage aircraft. There are, however, lots of caveats. The Mi-24 is a huge and heavy helicopter, which makes it an easy target for a lot of different types of ground fire. It has a few different infrared countermeasures built in, at least once you've got it spaded. But at 9.7, you're going to have to decide how often you think you're going to be going up against IR-guided missiles. So, these often end up being your only protection against enemy helicopters and jets. That said, depending on how confident you are in the built-in countermeasures, it might be worth thinking about flying out with only chaff instead of mixing chaff and flares. If you're doing standoff missile attacks, you'll also need to be very careful with your positioning, since the Mi-24 is loud, with a very distinctive sound, and your engine noise is going to give you away even from a medium distance. Plus, as mentioned already, this thing is an enormous target, and if you're in a hover in a place where people can see you, you can be quite vulnerable to main gunshots from enemy tanks. Now, if you go in for a rocket pass, or a bombing run, since that's actually possible in this thing, you'll have to keep in mind the speed and inertia this thing builds up, and plan your attack run accordingly. I had the most success doing runs over the battle when I flew this more like a slow bomber than like a helicopter. Since it maneuvers kind of like a city bus much of the time, loitering over the battlefield and trying to make small adjustments to engage, or swing back around to take, like a second shot at something you just flew over, will frequently turn you into a sponge for enemy fire. Just fly through, make it a longer pass, and then come back around at higher speed. Or, of course, just stick to the standoff missile attacks. Now, the R-60 missiles give you a credible weapon to attack other helicopters or aircraft with, but the fixed forward gun ends up being a bit more difficult to use than a traditional chin turret, and flying out to scout tag for your team isn't an especially viable tactic with the Mi-24P. Visually, the Mi-24P is pretty distinct. It's huge, it's imposing, and it just looks mean. The in-game paint jobs for the Mi-24P versions aren't especially interesting, and to be honest, I don't really like the default striped paint job on the German Premium, but you can find some interesting stuff on War Thunder Live if you want to spice it up a little bit. When it's time to land the Mi-24P, I strongly suggest using hover mode for the easy landing approach. This is a big heavy whale of a helicopter, and if you've got any lateral momentum when you touch down, it's going to roll around a bit or even tip over. Don't forget that the Mi-24P has retractable landing gear, and you'll need to pop it down for landing. Trying to use this to capture spawn points under fire is extremely difficult because it can be a very vulnerable target when it's stationary and not moving, and I don't generally recommend trying to use it in that role. To close out on the Mi-24P, this helicopter has serious offensive firepower, with weapon loadouts for every possible type of mission. It's quite fast for such a large helicopter. It has a generous supply of countermeasures, with some built-in infrared mitigation systems, it can sometimes withstand a surprising amount of damage before going down, and frankly, this thing just has a bad attitude. However, the Mi-24 is big and heavy, and can sometimes be pretty sluggish in maneuvers. It feels like the fixed gun is a bit of a downgrade in usefulness over the chin turret that other models have, even though it has better firepower. And the Mi-24P doesn't have thermal sights for the gunner or anything, which can be a bit of a handicap sometimes. The final verdict on the Mi-24P is that this is a very flexible and effective attack helicopter, and once you get the feel for its heavy frame and freight truck style maneuverability, you can have a lot of fun with it. A lot of players seem to be afraid of this thing, and rightly so. As always, thanks for watching.